Man, the AI world is just crazy these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at 1 minute you're catching up on the latest, and the next there's a whole new model blowing up the charts.
Yeah.
Claude, for example, it's consistently right up there with the top LLMs. It makes you think, where's this all going? What's the story behind all this
And
progress?
that is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to unpack a really cool conversation with Dario Amodei.
Okay.
He is the CEO of Anthropic, the company behind Claude.
Right.
And we really wanted to boil down what his thinking is on the future of AI,
Yeah.
the whole path to AI safety and the science that's driving all these wild advancements.
Okay.
Now, the full convo does have Amanda Askell and Chris Olah later on.
Okay.
But for our deep dive today, we're going to focus on Dario's thoughts.
Gotcha. So for all of you listening, we're on a mission to basically extract the core insights from Dario about where AI is going, what are the big opportunities, the challenges, and those non-negotiables when it comes to building AI responsibly. So let's jump right in. Dario talks a lot about the scaling hypothesis. What is it exactly? And what made him such a strong believer in it?
Well, what's really interesting is how Dario's belief in this came from, I guess you could say, gut-level observations very early on.
Okay.
So back in late 2014, he's at Baidu with Andrew Ng. And at this point, deep learning is still kind of new.
Right.
There was this widespread thought that we're missing something. Like we didn't have the right algorithms to really nail things like speech recognition.
Right. The idea was that just more data, more compute wouldn't magically make it work. We need a deeper algorithmic insight.
Exactly. But Dario, and he calls it beginner's luck almost, he just thought, what if we just make the neural networks bigger,
Okay.
deeper, more layers? And crucially, what if we scale up the data we use to train them at the same time? So he saw them as like separate knobs you can turn,
Okay.
make them bigger, give them more data. And the key here was even just doing that simple thing brought some surprising and big improvements.
So what were some of the early results when they started turning those knobs, increasing the size and the data?
Yeah, so they started seeing some really cool improvements in speech recognition. Even though they weren't super rigorously tracking everything back then, there was this undeniable sense among the team that bigger models, more data, you get better results.
Right.
And he also points out the huge difference in compute power then versus now. I mean, they were training on just a handful of GPUs. Now we're talking tens of thousands, soon hundreds of thousands.
Right.
So that experience combined with similar ideas coming from people like Ilya Sutskever,
Yeah.
Rich Sutton's The Bitter Lesson, Warren Brandwen's writings, all that really solidified his belief between 2014 and 2017 that scaling alone could tackle, surprisingly, a wide range of cognitive tasks.
It's funny how something that sounds so simple, just make it bigger, can be so powerful. But I remember hearing arguments against scaling. Some people thought larger models might get the grammar, the syntax right, but wouldn't really understand the meaning, the semantics, or we'd run out of good data. How did scaling address those kinds of concerns?
That's a really great point, and Dario tackles those head on.
Okay.
Throughout the history of scaling, people kept predicting it would hit a wall.
Right.
Like the syntax versus semantics thing, that's classic. Then came, oh, models won't understand longer text.
Okay.
Then it was, we're going to run out of data, the data's not good enough. More recently, it's, well, models can't really reason, even if they're bigger.
Yeah.
But the thing is, these limits often weren't about the algorithms themselves, but things that scaling could actually solve.
So how did scaling do that? What was the mechanism?
Well, many times, the sheer size of the models, that plus tons of data, that's actually what let them learn these more complex things implicitly. Of course, new techniques, better architectures, those helped. But often the core driver was just bigger models, more data.
Gotcha.
He's got this great analogy. He compares it to a chemical reaction. You've got 3 ingredients,
Wow.
size of the network, how long you train it, and the amount of data.
Okay.
You got to scale all 3 linearly. If you only increase 1 or 2, you run out of reagents, so to speak. And the reaction, that big jump in capability, it plateaus.
Right. That makes sense. And this wasn't just for language tasks, right? He saw these scaling laws popping up in other areas too.
You got it. So around early 2020, the first papers about scaling laws, they were mainly about language. But later that year, they started seeing similar consistent patterns in other stuff. Images, videos, text to image, image to text, even math problem solving. This was a big deal because it showed scaling wasn't just a fluke for language, it was something deeper.
Okay.
And this goes beyond just the initial pre-training phase. It applies to post-training alignment techniques and even building new, fancier reasoning models.
So his gut feeling is there's no theoretical reason why AI can't reach or even surpass human-level general intelligence just by scaling up.
That's his strong intuition. He thinks there's no ceiling below human-level intelligence that would stop a big enough model from getting there.
Interesting.
I mean, humans can figure out all these crazy, complex patterns in the world, so why not AI? Especially as our training methods get better. He even suggests maybe the current bottleneck isn't intelligence itself, but the fact that we still need humans in the loop for certain applications like biology, where you have clinical trials, regulations, all that human stuff.
Right, right. But what if there is a wall? Like, if these scaling laws do start to slow down before we get to human-level intelligence, what does he think might be causing that?
He considers a few possibilities. One big one is that the improvement in the quality and diversity of training data might level off.
Okay.
Another is that we might need some totally new breakthroughs in neural network architectures or training algorithms to get to the next level.
Right, right.
He points out there have been times in the past where progress seemed to hit a wall, like issues with stability and very deep networks, but then new optimization methods came along and things took off again.
Yeah.
But as of now, he doesn't see any hard evidence that scaling is about to slow down.
And given how things are going, where does he see things heading in the near future?
Well, if you just extrapolate from the current scaling curves, he thinks we're probably just a few years away from seeing AI that can outperform the best humans in various specialized areas.
Wow.
So, of course, he acknowledges that this might not go on forever because those potential limits we talked about, but that's the direction we're headed if the current trends hold.
Okay, so we've got this incredible potential with scaling, but then there's the really important issue of safety.
Yeah.
What are Dario's biggest worries when he thinks about the safety of these increasingly powerful AI systems?
Well, his concerns aren't about some, sci-fi scenario of AI turning evil.
Right.
It's more about real-world risks that are already here,
Mm.
like potential for huge economic disruption.
Yeah.
Power getting concentrated in the hands of those who control this advanced AI.
Right.
And then the real danger of that power being abused.
Right.
He emphasizes that AI inherently increases the amount of power in the world.
Yeah.
And if it's concentrated and used badly, that could be really bad for everyone.
Okay. And Anthropic has been really vocal about taking AI safety seriously. Can you explain their approach, especially the responsible scaling policy and the AI safety level standards?
Yeah, so Anthropic has been proactive about this.
Okay.
They've developed this framework, the Responsible Scaling Policy, RSP, and the AI Safety Level Standards, ASLs, to try to anticipate and mitigate these risks as they pop up.
Okay.
The RSP is specifically designed to deal with two main categories of risks: misuse, which is basically AI being used for bad stuff by bad actors,
Right.
and autonomy risks, which is about AI potentially acting in ways we don't want, especially as it gets better at making its own decisions.
Okay, yeah. So misuse would be something like using AI to spread disinformation, and autonomy risks could be an AI making some weird decision in a complex real-world environment.
Exactly, you got it.
It's wild that they're thinking so hard about risks that aren't even fully here yet.
That's a key part of their approach.
Okay.
They know these risks are evolving fast and haven't fully materialized yet.
Right.
Like about a year ago, Dario was talking about how bio-related risks could become a big deal in just 2 to 3 years because of how fast AI is progressing. So because of this speed, they believe we have to start taking steps now, even for threats that haven't totally shown up yet.
Gotcha, gotcha. And how do these AI safety levels, the ASLs, fit into this? Like, what kind of escalating threats are they worried about?
So ASLs are like a way to categorize the risk levels of AI models as they get more and more powerful.
Okay.
At ASL 3, they're mainly focused on preventing non-state actors, like think terrorists or criminals, from stealing these models and misusing them. Things like cyber attacks, bioweapons, and even starting to worry about models making their own decisions.
Okay.
Then you move up to ASL 4. This is scarier. Now you're talking about scenarios where these super powerful models could boost the capabilities of entire countries, state-level actors. And this is where you start getting risks like model deception.
Model deception, what is that?
That's where AI might try to hide its true abilities or intentions.
Whoa. That's getting pretty Black Mirror-ish.
Yes.
So how do they even begin to make sure these models are safe at those higher levels? Like, how do they verify what the models are actually doing?
This is where mechanistic interpretability comes in.
Okay.
Dario thinks this is super important for verifying the safety of advanced AI, especially at those higher ASL levels.
Okay.
The basic idea is to look inside the AI model, understand how it's thinking, how it's making decisions, and ultimately verify what it's doing and what it's really trying to do, not just going by what it says or does in tests. This becomes even more crucial when you can't really trust the model's words or its actions during normal tests.
So it's like trying to understand how this complex machine is actually working on the inside, not just looking at its outputs.
Exactly.
What about the role of government in all this? What does Dario think about government regulation for AI safety?
He's actually pretty positive about regulations like California's SB 10047, at least in principle.
Okay.
He thinks it's super important for governments to step in and create some oversight in this rapidly evolving field.
Right.
But he's also really clear that these regulations need to be very specific and practical, targeted at the biggest risks, and developed in a way that everyone can agree on.
Yeah.
He's worried that if regulations are badly designed or too broad, they might actually stifle innovation without really making AI safer.
So walk me through his thinking on this.
Well, his main point is that regulations should be surgical in their approach. That means they should be very precisely aimed at those specific high-risk areas, not just blanket rules that could end up hindering progress in areas that are actually beneficial.
Right.
He also thinks it's crucial for governments to work closely with experts in the field, both from industry and academia, to make sure these regulations are informed by the latest scientific understanding and the realities of AI development.
Makes sense. But the fact that not all AI companies are playing by the same safety rules right now seems like a big problem, right?
Oh, totally. He points out the danger of having different safety standards across the AI industry.
Okay.
If some companies are being super careful while others are cutting corners on safety to save money or move faster, it creates this negative situation where the bad actors could screw things up for everyone.
Right.
He's also not totally sold on the idea of relying just on voluntary commitments from companies, even those with good intentions. He really feels like we need concrete action on AI regulation, and soon.
He uses the analogy of a race to the top versus a race to the bottom. What does he mean by that?
It's a great way to think about the different ways AI could develop.
Okay.
The race to the bottom is the scary one. That's where companies prioritize speed and cutting costs above everything else, even safety.
Right.
And that could lead to AI systems being released that aren't safe or reliable.
Yeah, that's bad.
No one wins in that scenario because the risks could affect everyone. The race to the top is the ideal. That's where companies compete on things like safety, trustworthiness, and responsible development. So if one company comes up with a great new safety practice that leads to better AI, others are encouraged to adopt it too.
Right. And that raises the bar for everyone.
Exactly. And Dario sees Anthropic's mission as being part of this race to the top, almost like an experiment in how to actually build AI safety into the development process while pushing the limits of what AI can do.
Right. So they're trying to lead by example.
Exactly. He sees Anthropic as a company that's fundamentally about building AI safely, not just building AI fast.
Okay.
They know they might make mistakes, and their approach will keep evolving.
Right.
But their big goal is to develop these safety practices that can be used by the whole AI industry.
Gotcha. He also mentioned this idea that talent density beats talent mass. What's the philosophy behind that?
So his point is that a smaller team of really skilled, motivated people, what he calls A players, can get way more done and more efficiently than a huge team with a wider range of skills and maybe less clear goals. In a high talent density environment, everyone trusts each other, everyone understands the goals, and that reduces the need for bureaucracy, strict rules, and internal conflicts.
Right. So it's about quality over quantity.
Exactly. He even quotes Steve Jobs, who said, "A players like to work with other A players." It's motivating to be surrounded by really smart, driven people all working towards the same goal.
What does he think makes someone a great AI researcher or engineer?
For research, he says open-mindedness is key. He talks about his own experience with the scaling hypothesis, how he saw the same data as other researchers, but was maybe more willing to challenge the assumptions everyone else was making.
Interesting.
He also highlights being willing to explore new, less crowded areas of research, like mechanistic interpretability. His advice is to skate where the puck is going, meaning focus on areas that are going to be important in the future.
Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about some of the technical stuff. He mentioned RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. Why does he think that's so effective in aligning these big language models with what humans want?
He ties it back to that scaling hypothesis idea.
Okay.
If you train a model that's big enough, With enough computing power, it'll generally get better at whatever you're training it to do.
Right.
And RLHF is basically a way to train the model to do what humans want, or at least what humans prefer in terms of the responses it gives.
Right.
He also sees RLHF as crucial for bridging the gap between these super smart AI models and us humans.
Mm.
A super intelligent AI isn't that useful if it can't communicate its knowledge in a way that we can understand.
Right.
RLHF helps align the model's output with human comprehension and preferences.
Makes sense. And he seems to think that advances in reinforcement learning techniques could also make models even smarter beyond just alignment.
He does. He sees a lot of potential there.
Okay, thinking about the cost of all this,
Mm.
is pre-training still the most expensive part of developing these models?
As of right now, yeah, pre-training, where the model learns from tons of data, that's the biggest chunk of the cost.
Okay.
But he thinks that in the future, the post-training phase might actually become more expensive.
Why is that?
Well, as we try to make models behave better, make them safer, more reliable, that post-training work, that's going to require a lot of effort and resources.
Right. Anthropic has released a few different models under the Claude brand, like Sonnet and Haiku. What's the idea behind having these different tiers?
Initially, they thought about it as a trade-off between intelligence, cost, and speed.
Okay.
Opus was supposed to be the smartest, but also the slowest and priciest, like a big masterpiece. Sonnet, like a poem, was in the middle. And Haiku, short and quick, was meant to be the fastest and cheapest, though maybe a little less smart. But their overall goal is to move this whole trade-off curve up and to the left.
Meaning what?
So they want more intelligence and performance for the same or lower cost and latency.
Gotcha.
He uses the example of Sonnet 3.5, which actually surpassed the original Opus 3 in intelligence, while costing and running about the same as the previous Sonnet model.
Wow.
And they saw particularly big improvements in programming tasks. Now even their newest and smallest model, Haiku 3.5, is supposedly as good as the original Opus 3 in many areas.
That's pretty remarkable. Speaking of updates and performance, I've seen people say, not just about Claude, but about other language models too, that they sometimes seem to get dumber after an update. What's Dario's take on that?
He's very clear that the actual model itself, the core knowledge and how it processes information, that doesn't change unless there's a whole new model release.
Okay.
The feeling that a model got worse is probably due to a few things. One is A/B testing. Some users might be using a slightly different version of the model without knowing it. Another is changes to the system prompt.
Right.
That's the initial instructions and context you give the model.
Oh.
It's unlikely those changes are meant to make the model worse, but they can shift its behavior in ways that users might see as less intelligent. He also points out that these models are so complex that even small changes in how you talk to them or what you ask them can lead to different results.
Yeah.
And then he says there's probably a psychological element too. When a new model comes out, it's all exciting and new, but then the novelty wears off and you start noticing its limits and quirks more.
Right.
And finally, he talks about how hard it is to control subjective stuff like the model's personality, how much it talks, and all the trade-offs in trying to optimize those things for everyone.
So even though it might feel like models are getting dumber sometimes, the big picture is still that AI is getting more powerful and capable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He says very clearly that the trend of scaling is continuing, and Anthropic will definitely release models in the future that are much more powerful than anything we have today.
Okay.
In fact, he says if they don't do that, they'll have deeply failed as a company.
Wow. Strong words. In his essay, Machines of Loving Grace, he seems pretty optimistic about the future with AI. When does he think we might start seeing this era of super useful AI, as he calls it?
He's careful about predicting the future,
Okay.
but right now he thinks it's more like 5 to 10 years away, not decades or a century. He emphasizes how crazy fast the field has moved recently, even if human systems and regulations tend to change slower.
Okay. One area he's really excited about is biology and medicine. How does he see AI transforming those fields?
He talks about AI creating a compressed 21st century for biology and medicine. He points out that a lot of biological progress has been about our increasing ability to see, understand, and manipulate what's happening inside cells and organisms.
Yeah.
He thinks AI could be like super smart grad students for biologists and medical researchers.
Okay.
They can explore tons of possibilities really fast and find new treatments and targets way faster than humans can.
Right.
Like, he suggests AI could really speed up progress in things like antibody-drug conjugates.
Yeah.
That's an area where there's been a lot of potential, but not that many successes so far.
Interesting. What about programming, since AI is built on code? How does he see the role of human programmers changing?
He thinks programming is one of the fields that's going to change the most because of AI.
Okay.
He talks about how much progress AI has already made in doing real-world programming tasks.
Right.
He mentions benchmarks like SWE Bench, where AI has shown big improvements in a short time. He estimates that in the next year or two, AI could automate something like 90% of routine programming tasks and do it really well.
Whoa.
So human programmers will probably still be needed to set the goals, design the features, and manage the whole process, but the actual coding itself is going to be very different.
If AI can automate so much of what we do, what does Dario think will give humans meaning and purpose in the future?
That's a deep question, and he admits it deserves a lot more thought.
Yeah.
But he leans towards a philosophical view. Like, he asks, does something become less meaningful if it turns out we're living in a simulation? Or if someone else already discovered it in the past? He thinks the things that really matter are the process, the choices we make, our moral decisions, the sacrifices we make, the skills we learn, and especially our relationships with other people.
Right, right.
He's optimistic that even with powerful AI doing a lot of the work, we can still find meaning in our experiences, interactions, and choices.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dario Amodei's thoughts, what are the biggest takeaways for our listeners?
I think there are a few really key things. First, the power of scaling. It's been driving these incredible advancements in AI across many areas.
Right.
And Dario's early belief in this has been spot on. Second, Anthropic's approach to safety. They're being very proactive and thoughtful about mitigating risks, which is super important. Third, his focus on a race to the top in the AI industry, where companies prioritize safety and responsible development.
Yeah.
That's a really important vision for the future. And finally, his optimism about the potential of AI in fields like biology and programming.
Yeah.
It suggests a future full of opportunities, but also one that we need to navigate carefully.
His message about balancing innovation with responsibility is a powerful one.
It really highlights the need for both things as we develop these increasingly powerful technologies.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, as you think about what Dario Amodei has shared, consider that balance between the excitement of AI's potential and the need to address its risks head on. What parts of this conversation resonated with you the most? We encourage you to check out Anthropic's work and all the important discussions happening around AI ethics and governance. This is a conversation that affects all of us, and it's one that we all need to be part of.